hello everyone. My name is Earl Brian. I'm your host for the Burden of Command podcast here, and I've got a special guest for us today, Mr. Jim Bouchard, the black belt leader, the Sensei leader movement capitan. Mr. Bouchard, how are you doing today?
It's an honor to be with you, sir.
Well, good. Nice to have you. So, full disclosure for everybody listening, Jim and I have talked quite a few times about leadership, so this is probably going to be one of the more easy, relaxed interviews I've done so far on this podcast. So,
well, I hope so. I'll try not to make trouble for you.
Well, I wouldn't have it any other way, right? So Jim, the question I like to ask all of my guests, and I'll start with you as well, what does the phrase burden of command mean to you?
I'm so glad you asked that question because you got two loaded words in there as far as I'm concerned. The first one is burden because leadership is not a burden. It's a privilege. It's an honor, right? And I know the spirit you intend that in, so this is just kind of fun semantic games. And the other one is command because, and again, I appreciate that, the application of that word, but, you know, I've been saying for a long time now, especially in private business now, the age of command and control is dead. It's over, right? And if you're still operating in that mode as an individual or as an organization, you're in serious trouble, or you're headed for it. And, you know, it's interesting. I know you and I have talked about this. I think the average person misunderstands completely what the word command means from a military perspective. I've never met more compassionate leaders, more people that really care about the people they serve and the people they serve with than military leaders. So I think what's happened is in the civilian world, we've really misused that word command. So anyway, there's my thoughts. Command, you know, we've got to make sure we're clear on what that's all about. And burden, hell no. Leadership is not a burden. It's a privilege. It's an honor, right?
Yeah. No, it is. It is. And, you know, and like some of the previous guests have said before, it's kind of the same lines. You know, it's responsibility.
Absolutely.
Is what it boils down to. So, So like you said, we've talked a lot about this, and I like that you cleared up the military thing, right? Because that is one thing that really does bug me is there's this stereotypical view of the screaming, yelling, snot flying all over the place. And, you know, that happens in boot camp, sure. But outside of that, there's those folks aren't leaders, right? Those are they rely on the power on their collar. And so it really doesn't happen. And like Jim was saying, you know, the compassion piece, that is such a pivotal piece of the military, right? Is you have to love the people around you to be able to put your life on the line for them. And if you aren't taking care of one another, well, how does that happen? And so the piece there...
I couldn't agree with you more, but it's interesting because right there's... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, we must be having a little bit of a delay here. So what... No, what I was going to say is the kind of...
I was interrupting you. That was the problem, yeah.
That's all good. Well, no, the kind of the two primary orders, if you will, we call them 1 and 1A, is mission accomplishment and troop welfare. And what all of our great leaders know is you don't get mission accomplishment if you're not taking care of the troops.
Yeah, you know, but it's interesting because every time, you know, we can come up with all kinds of rules and guidelines and whatnot, there's an exception always, right? That's the cool thing about rules. Rules are made to be bent, broken, ignored sometimes, but there's principles that are undying. But this idea, you know, there's a place for yelling and screaming. I'm not naive. You know, I think too many people go too far the other way. For one thing, you know, people have passion and emotion involved in leadership situations. And sometimes we're going to come unglued a little bit. Or maybe not unglued, is we're going to become very intense at times as well. And a lot of times that is during a period of caring. When the drill sergeant's yelling at those troops in boot camp, it's because, you know, he sincerely, the ones that I've met anyway, they sincerely care. They're preparing them for a life and death situation. When you sign on for that, you know what you're getting into. You know, you join a football team, you know what you're getting into in the locker room. I went through it in the fire service. You know, there was a paramilitary type of atmosphere. So, you know, there are times when the yelling and screaming is necessary, and there's times when it's really that in itself is an act of compassion. But the problem is, like I said, it's misused so much in civilian life and in business. And most of the time, you know what it is? People confuse that confuse command in a military sense with dictatorial process in the civilian application. And that's where you got to be very careful. And again, there's, we could go on and on. There's a place for that once in a while too. But boy, that dictatorial mode has to be short-lived, right? Or else you're not going to engender the loyalty, trust, and affection of your people very long.
Well, yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, somebody's got to make the decision.
Right.
Right. And it's about, there's, and I know you have talked about these stories before, but the one scene that I think plays this out visually for people to really be able to grasp is in the movie Lone Survivor. At the very beginning of the movie, they're in the mountains of Afghanistan. The SEAL team's there to do some surveillance, and they get stumbled upon by the goat herders. And the team's trying to figure out what to do. Well, there's a bunch of enlisted guys, and there's the lieutenant, who's the person in command on scene. And they played out very well how this thing actually happens, because, the lieutenant could just say, do this, and they're going to do it. But he listens to everybody's feedback. They have the discussion
right.
of, well, we can tie them up. We can do this. This is the ramifications of each one of these. But there finally comes a point where he says, this is the one we're going with. And that's where that, quote, dictatorial thing comes in, when you use it wisely, right? Mm-hmm. Is listen, but make the decision and commit going forward.
Right. That's why these things are so dynamic, That's why we can't be condemned to just one particular, even a couple of leadership styles. We have to be articulate at as many as possible, because each situation calls for a different approach, and we have to be able to be facile. And even the role of leader and follower needs to be something that we can shift rapidly from. Like you said, that lieutenant soliciting the input. It's not always the prudent thing to do. Sometimes you have to make the decision quickly, and then of course you hope that you enjoy what I believe strongly are the three greatest assets that a leader can have, is that respect, trust, and loyalty. Because then people who need to respond to those commands in that moment, right? There's a contract, right? A predetermined contract that they're going to follow you because they trust you, not just because you're yelling loud. And we have to be careful, though, because that gets into that. There's a movement now in leadership studies, right, about the word collectivism is coming up again, particularly when studying indigenous cultures, right? And a lot of indigenous cultures, particularly Native American and whatnot, a lot of them had more of a collective approach to leadership. But, of course, we conflate that a lot of times with communism and that type of thing, right, in a political sense. So that's not what they're talking about in leadership studies. They're talking about exactly what you said. Is the group think sometimes stronger than the individual think? And I don't know, that's a pretty interesting thing to go down, because I was just reading a study where some psychologists and anthropologists were figuring out that probably the distinguishing characteristic of human being is that we really aren't very good thinkers individually. Mm-hmm. It's our collective thinking that really separates us from even our closest cousins, like the chimpanzees and whatnot. That's kind of disturbing to think of them as cousins, but
hey, for some of us that might be an upgrade, right?
Yeah, right. But they're very close, right, to us, physiologically, and but they tend to think very individualistically, a little bit collectively. We tend to think very collectively. So it's interesting. That's where it's heading. So that's why I keep shouting that same meme over and over again, that the age of command and control is dead. People are just not responding to it, right? That do as I say, not as I do thing it doesn't even work for 2-year-old kids, does it?
Yeah, well, no. I mean, because you kind of hit there on it with the. I've not actually heard the term collectivism, but the words we use, because this is something my partner and I teach a lot from the leadership phalanx, is cognitive diversity. And it's the same thing. And there's studies. There's he's a mathematician, Scott Page, out of the University of Michigan, and he has mathematically proven that there's no point where adding more perspective is a negative thing. So, if you ask 10 people what an outcome is, or what the outcome is going to look like, and however you measure success, you're going to see success. You add an 11th one, you're going to get a better outcome. You add the 12th one. Now, as the more people you add, the slower or the slighter that margin of increase is, but you never hit a negative return. And he's got a lot of great studies out there. There was one that he breaks down. It was Netflix. I think it was about 10 years or so ago, Netflix put out I want to say it was a $10 million prize. I could be wrong on that. But if you could increase the accuracy of their algorithm when it would suggest what people liked, by I think it was 10%, you won the $10 million. It may have only been $1 million. I may just be throwing too many tens in there. But the point is there was like 1,000 or more groups that came in. And as individual groups, they were able to get it up to, like 2%, 3%, right, something like that. Right. Mm-hmm. And then slowly you started seeing these groups come together. And then it went from all these thousands of groups down to, 10 or 15 groups. And then they got up into the 8 or 9% range. And so what Netflix is hoping doesn't happen now is they all come together because they might actually hit that 10% improvement.
No, that's fascinating. And, you're hitting on a lot of the stuff that folks like Jeff Dalton and the Agile bunch, and he'd be a great guest for you. The other thing, though, is, again, as always, first of all, I want to say, isn't it amazing that we need all these academic studies? This is one of the frustrating things about this business, right?
Right.
All these academic studies to verify what we've known for centuries, mm-hmm. that people tend to work better when they're cooperating, right? And right. The real trick, and really what we're trying to do with Sensei Leader Movement, right, is make sure that we're actually doing something about it. You know what I mean? When we get in the room, it's all nice to talk about these things and whatnot, but let's figure out exactly, how to do it and make sure that we are. The one downside to the, getting all the different perspectives, and we always have to be cognizant of it, right? Because there's always a flip side, so to speak, is there are times, because sometimes leaders get bogged down, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're doing it, if you're collecting that information with the sincere intent, right, to make an informed decision, and you have the time to do it, then that's what you should be doing. But there are times when decisions need to be made fast, right? And sometimes a leader, out of cowardice or insecurity, or you mentioned sometimes I've seen it a lot in government work where people are afraid to rock the boat. They don't want to go, but it happens in private sector as well. They're afraid of consequences, right? And sometimes very rationally. But damn, sometimes you just got to step up. That's part of what you mentioned, leadership is responsibility. That's part of the responsibility. Step up, make the decision, and move along. And what did Mr. Farragut say, Admiral Farragut? Damn the torpedoes, right? Full speed ahead. We worked a lot in Mobile, Alabama this year, so I've gotten intimate with the writings of Admiral Farragut.
Yeah. Well, no, and it's, you're right. And it was, so we're recording this during the celebration week of the 50th anniversary of the landing on the moon.
Oh, amazing, huh?
It is. And, one of my heroes, actually, I just released an episode on it earlier today, Gene Kranz.
Right,
and
right.
So I've been re-listening to Failure is Not an Option, and there was one piece in there that then I hadn't really picked up on before. If I had, I forgot I picked up on it. But, he was talking about, he goes, the stakes were so high and the time windows were so short, we didn't have the luxury of having these conversations in real time. Mm-hmm. Part of our task was, leading up to a mission, to try to think of all of these failures that could happen, have the conversations in advance, so when they did happen, we could just act.
Right, right. And that's it, right? That's really, in a nutshell, you just described, you painted a perfect picture of true confidence. Surety of an outcome is foolishness. Depending on surety of an outcome is foolishness. True confidence is not surety of an outcome. It's preparation. It's surety of preparation, that you've done everything you can in this moment to be prepared for what you're facing right now. And sometimes that has to come really quick. And I'm so glad you brought up the moon mission anyway. I'd love to tell you a cool story about that, but I'm going to release a meme on Saturday. I'll give you the preview, is that, on Saturday we're going to be celebrating that 50 years ago today, the Apollo team rendered the word impossible meaningless. And I really believe that with all my heart. That was just an amazing event. And sadly, some people have forgotten about it. And, of course, a lot of people alive now didn't experience that, so...
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the other thing, too, is like we're coming into a period right now where you run into a lot of people who don't even remember shuttle missions. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing growing up, is like every time there was a shuttle launch, like they'd roll the big TV into the classroom and you all got together around and watch it. And, I saw the Challenger explosion live on TV, and it's like, man, so... Mm-hmm.
No,
But,
and the cool thing about that too is that idea. You can't separate leadership and courage, and we can talk about courage in many different applications, many different layers. But one of the most moving things that I've seen recently was at the Kennedy Center and the display for Challenger. And one of the most moving things is those people. And remember, now we're in this age when something like that happens, the immediate backlash is, well, we can't sacrifice lives for this. We can't take this risk. Those people, and I'm sure you went through this in the military as well, right? They prepared for that. They had their wills made out. They had everything in place before they leave for that mission. They understand the enormous risk, and so that to me is just the absolute purest expression of courage, knowing the danger you're going into and doing it anyway. So,
well, yeah,
that's leadership. Yeah.
It is, and they all, like you said, they all accepted it. I mean, I think one of the things gets lost in the history of the space program is how many people we didn't lose.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, John Glenn, we almost lost him. Scott Carpenter, we almost lost him. As I said this morning, we lost Ed White, Roger Chaffee, and Virgil Grissom on the very first Apollo mission. But there were so many people that we didn't lose. Like I said, John Glenn, he was so close. They thought that his heat shield had ejected. Right. And they were going through all these issues to try to fix that. Scott Carpenter, he had issues with his guidance, and they thought he was going to skip off into space, and they had to fix all this stuff on the fly with the world watching. I mean, talk about pressure. The world was watching, our enemies and our allies.
And isn't that the difference? I saw a special recently because I've been watching. I was so absorbed in that when I was a kid, and I've been watching every special I can on it. And the idea that the Russians had their failures too, but they made sure that they were kept secret while we broadcast ours. And you brought up something so cool too, that recognition of success. There was an emergency landing of a commercial airliner. I think it was last week or the week before. And I remember getting so angry about the headline because the headline was just focused totally on, emergency landing, engine failed, blah, blah, and not one mention of the courage, not even the names of the pilot and the co-pilot that brought that plane down safely. You know what I mean? We need to celebrate that more. We need to celebrate the successes. It's certain we want to be fully aware of the failures. We want to acknowledge our failures and embrace them as opportunities to grow. But at the same time, boys, it would be nice if we hear success stories in leadership lately.
No, you're right. It's
which is what you're doing, by the way. So I should say that. That's a good promo, right?
Hey, well, there you go. Appreciate that. No, it's like I'm trying to remember who it was, but there was somebody. It may have actually been Zig Ziglar. Now that I think about it, but he made a comment. He said, everybody always argues, what's the toughest position in sports? Is it a quarterback? Is it a pitcher? He goes, I'm here to tell you right now, it's a goalie in hockey. He goes, because those guys go out there and they do their job 93, 94% right. He goes, but whenever they mess up, there's a big red siren that goes off, and everybody knows, hey, this guy just screwed up.
Oh, I can identify. I know you were a goalie, right?
Street hockey goalie.
Yeah. See, I was a kicker in football, and it's the same thing, man. As long as you're putting them through the pipes, nobody even notices you. But man, when you miss that thing,
exactly.
And I got to tell you, for the record, from all my brothers and sisters that kick footballs, there's no such thing as a chip shot, right? When you got 7,000 pounds of humanity trying to take your head off when you get.
I bet. No, I can only imagine. That's that's why I always laugh when being here at Indianapolis, Pat McAfee, right? Guy,
he's a riot, isn't he?
He is, and I always love whenever he would get in that whole controversy about kickers aren't football players. I was like, okay,
they are. Once that damn ball leaves your foot, let me tell you, then you're the same as everyone else. So.
Right? Yeah. So you mentioned the Sensei leader movement there. Mm-hmm. So what's going on with that right now?
Oh man, we're so excited! We're finishing up the details for our trip to Kenya in November, at least to Kenya. Mm-hmm. We're also looking at Uganda, Tanzania, and possibly Ghana on that trip. If not on that trip, but because what we're trying to do there with our partners, and another person would be a great guest for you. She got terrific stories about her leadership initiatives is Nana Wanjo. She's our partner in Kenya.
Okay.
And she's doing great work over there with empowering women, especially women entrepreneurs and leaders. But at any rate, yeah, we're putting the finishing touches on that, so we're looking forward to that trip. We'll be back on the road again in a couple of weeks. Don't ask me where I'm going. I'm trying to. I think we start in Pittsburgh, going to South Carolina, back out to California, down to Texas, and then off to Africa. So, yeah, we're really excited about all that. And what it's all about is, they say it's lonely at the top. Well, it shouldn't be. First of all, what we're talking about with Sensei Leader Movement has nothing to do with rank, title, or position of authority. We're talking about embracing leadership at all levels, right? And it's about supporting and developing human-centric leaders. And we're developing this network of great people all over the world. So, and that's the hope, that people, we're a nexus so people can communicate with one another, support one another, help one another grow and develop I keep emphasizing that word, human-centric leader. That's our sole focus, is on the humanity of leadership. We don't deal with any of the technical management side. There's great people to do that. We don't need me messing around with that. So we stay, and a lot of it, as the name implies, a lot of it comes from my experience, 30 plus years teaching martial arts, leading a martial arts organization, and learning from those folks, especially the little dragons, the 3 to 6 year olds. I'd probably share more stories in a presentation from those guys than almost any other group of people.
Well, I mean, yeah, I can imagine kids will keep you humble. They don't know how to sugarcoat it, right?
You got to work to be a leader to kids, right? Absolutely.
Well, I tell you this, I'll share this story with you here because I know all the work you're doing in Africa, and so I travel to D.C. quite a lot with my day job, and the last probably half a dozen or more times I've been there. The driver usually grab a Uber from Reagan National to wherever I'm going. Has been from Nigeria, and this last time I asked the guy, I said, "Okay, I think I scared him a little bit." Because I said, "What is it with Nigerians in D.C.?" And I figured, well, yeah, I probably worded that a little poorly, so I backed up. And I said, my last few drivers have been from Nigeria, and it seems like the secret's out about how great D.C. is in Nigeria. And then he changed. He realized I wasn't, trying to be a jerk. He said, like, "Oh, man, in Nigeria, we love America." He goes, "There's so much opportunity here. There's not that much opportunity back home." He goes, "I come to America, I can have a good job, I can make money, I can get an education." And he starts telling me his life story. He's like, I'm here for construction management. There's not a lot of great construction in Nigeria, so I come home, or I come to America, I go to school, I save my money, and I go home. I've got a warehouse now that I sell beauty products out of until I come back. And then my goal is to put Nigeria on the map as a construction place in Africa. Right. He goes, "We love America." He goes, "The only thing that we don't understand is why Americans don't love America more."
Isn't that the fact, right? They're all, it's a crisis of abundance, right? But no, I'm so glad you brought that up. I wish I could remember who wrote the article, but it was in International Leadership Association, one of their books that they publish every year, a compilation of different articles that they collect. And this was a woman from, I don't remember if she was probably from South Africa, I think. But at any rate, she was talking about, she was urging more Africans to highlight African leadership, because there are tremendous leaders. And again, at all levels. I'm not just talking about political and business leaders. I've got plenty of great people there. And they are trying to make Africa strong. And, PLO Lumumba, one of my favorites. And I love how he says it. He says it's time for Africa to take her place at the world table, at the global table, as diners, not as waiters, you see. And it's just a great perspective. And in the youth movement there. So it's interesting. Sometimes people, they say, "Why are you going to Africa?" You're going, and I don't go anywhere really to teach. That's not the mission anyway. It's to share. And, that's two ways. I'm hoping to learn so much from, we've got some really interesting meetings lined up. And, from everyone, people on the ground. There's one guy I want to meet who opened, out of nothing, opened a little salad shop in Nairobi. And I caught him on YouTube, actually, is where I heard of him. And I thought, what a great example of leadership. I mean, he really had nothing. And he's now expanding and basically franchising these things. He's, and that's the type of leadership we need. In addition to, the conventional sense of a leader as someone with a position of authority in business or politics. So, no, it's happening. There's lots of great stuff there happening, and like I said, to me, that's a trip for sharing. That's really what it's all about. And I'm gonna steal as much, if not more, from them than they can ever hope to take from me. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's what it's all about, right? I mean, what we do is it's as much about educating ourselves as it is sharing knowledge with anyone else. And,
sure.
We talked about this in the beginning. You know, it's we have a lot of people out there who act like this is like newfound knowledge. Like, oh, here are the 37 and a half steps.
No.
Yeah, this is basic dawn of man stuff we're talking about here.
And it's about working together. You know, that's the big thing, too. I think too many people conflate leadership with, you know, you're going to go and you're going to, as a leader, you're going to go and start telling people what to do and you know, this and that. Again, that's that command and control mentality. No, it's about going and listening. It's about sharing your piece of the pie. And it's about, you know, figuring out what can we do together. You know, that's the idea, you know, to me that I'd like to say a progressive view of leadership. Hell no, this stuff isn't new. It's not rocket surgery. You know, what did Lao Tzu say? When the people are not in awe of your majesty, then great majesty has been achieved, right?
Right.
What was he saying? You know, we've got to roll up our sleeves and work together. So.
Yeah. And it's you know, again, and I like that because that's what I tell folks. It's like, look, you know how you want to be led. Go lead that way.
Yeah, I like you saying that, too, because that's one of the great lessons, too, that we always have to keep revisiting as leaders, is that as leaders, we also want and need to be led. I mean, I do believe it's a basic human need. And again, I said earlier, we have to understand and we have to be facile in switching those roles. You know, there's a quick story. When I was working in the shipyard years ago, I was building Trident submarines down in Connecticut, and this pipe assembly came in. We were a little ahead of schedule, so this pipe assembly came in, and it, because it was out of schedule, it wouldn't fit on the boat. Right? And these two old grizzled pipe fitters, been in the yard for 40 years or more, they go over there and they take a Sharpie and they mark the wrapping of the pipe two places. They cut it here, we'll snake it on the boat, put it back together. No, that couldn't happen, right? The white hat supervisors had to come along. I kid you not, as I remember it, probably about 2 weeks of meetings where that thing just sat on the dock. Then it gets sent by barge back to Quonset, Rhode Island, about an 80-mile trip by water back and forth. Shows up back in the yard about 6 weeks later, probably a cost of close to $500,000, you know, to get this thing back and forth. I don't know. And what do you suppose that thing looked like when it got back?
Probably cut right where they said to cut it.
Exactly, right? Now, what if those supervisors, what if they had adopted the mentality we're talking about and just switched roles and became followers at that point and respected the experience and the wisdom of those two guys on the front line that knew what the hell they were doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you know, let's tie that back into the, we've kind of been talking about the Apollo stuff since it's that time frame right now. You know, the Apollo 13. There's a scene, they kind of pay homage to it in the movie, but there's a random light that went off, and nobody knew what it was except for one guy, right? And it went off one time in like one simulation. But in the movie, the way they show is like the light goes off and he just says, you know, cycle this switch. It's a very brief. But if you hear the story, I can't remember the guy's name now, but they talk about this guy was the guy that, like, he was their Rain Man, right? He knew and remembered everything. And they said as soon as he said, flip this switch and it should go away, nobody questioned him. They knew this is the guy who knows his shit. This is the guy that you want to listen to in this situation. And they just did it. And then it moved on, you know, and like you said, when you look at the time constraints that they had trying to figure out how to get those guys back.
Yeah.
If they had spent a significant amount of time trying to worry about that instead of worrying about the voltage, worrying about the carbon dioxide buildup, all that good stuff. Yeah. That could have had a drastic turn over one stupid button.
And that goes back to what you said. Sometimes you have to do it very quickly, but to collect, you know, the perspectives. The same thing, you know, just before the LEM touchdown on 11, right, that they got those two alarms, the 1202 and the 1201 alarm, which nobody in Mission Control knew what it was. Fortunately, they had lines of communication open, and somebody in another office who dealt with the software said, yeah, no, that's good. Don't worry about it. Right. And imagine if I believe Gene Kranz was at the helm of that, the landing, wasn't he? Yeah, so he says, hey, yep, that's good. I mean, he didn't sit there and question, who's this guy from,
Right.
No, but that's the other thing, too. That's another characteristic of leadership. You want the trust, the loyalty, and the respect of the people you serve, right? But they need your trust, loyalty, and respect, too. And that's how you get it. And, that's one of the biggest arguments that I get sometimes. And, I still work with incarcerated kids, too.
Right.
And they really, it's really neat because their respect paradigm is a very focused one. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's very, I hesitate to, I'm going to say simple. It's very simple. And we lose sight of that sometimes, especially in a complex organization. And the question that they have, but it always comes up in CEO workshops too, C-suite workshops. I'll show somebody respect when they show me. And I always ask them, I say, well, wait a minute. Who's the leader? Who's supposed to go first?
Yep.
Right? So we need to show that respect. And that's, the only argument I get for that. Well, sometimes you can't trust people. I say, well, what the hell are they doing working with you then?
Amen.
Right? I mean, that should be part of the filtering process. If I can't trust somebody, they shouldn't be on my team.
Oh, yeah. No, that's so whenever we're teaching, we teach, we call them the 11 shields of the phalanx, because that's all a phalanx is a formation where the shields are kind of interlocked to make everything stronger for people. You're putting me
in a very Roman state of mind now.
Exactly. But the one thing I say is like, look, the one thing you have to be comfortable with as a leader is it's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's your fault. And I get that pushback too. And they're like, oh, it's not always my fault. It's this guy. Why is that person on your team?
No. It's That's always my fault. I know you're a huge Patton fan too. What did he say? A good general officer will always take the blame for anything. I'm paraphrasing, but always take the blame, whether or not it's his fault, and will always give credit to others, whether or not they deserve it. Right.
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because like you said, and always challenge. I throw it out. Okay, let's talk about it. What in this situation is not your fault? And we work through all the things like, no, you didn't set the vision clear enough. You didn't define what success looks like clear enough. You didn't put the right person on the team. You did these things as the leader.
You just hit, we could open up a huge can of worms here, because you just hit exactly the nail on the head of most of what's wrong with political leadership today, right?
Yeah.
It's not my fault. It's not my responsibility, because it's hard to get elected when you're saying, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I messed up." Right? You've got to blame the other person, and we're locked in this constant state of mortal combat now, particularly between two major political parties, where one wins by denigrating, destroying, vilifying the other, right?
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, and I don't want to get too far off on this, but you look at something as simple to solve as the immigration situation, and I'm adamant about that. That is a group I could assemble. Well, again, the kids I work with that are incarcerated, often a lot of them are very brilliant kids too. Right. And we talk about these real issues, and I'm telling you, they could solve this in 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
But it's hard when it has to be mine, right? And everything that went wrong is the other guy's fault, right?
Right.
And these people forget now we have YouTube. We saw the speech from 5 years ago when they were on the other side of it, right? So it's, and pick your poison. It doesn't matter which team you're talking about. So,
well, yeah, like you said, and there's not just there's not just two, or there's not just one right answer, right? So.
No, right? No, they're usually the best one isn't either your answer or my answer. It's the one we find together with my answer and your answer is the base, right? So, and that's, yeah.
Well, there's two things, right? So you got one side that, and this is a good conversation to have. I don't see this as being going on a tangent, because this is part of the responsibilities and burden of command is making tough decisions, right? And so you got one side that's saying, oh, we can't build a wall. We can't restrict our borders. We need better immigration policies. And you got one that we can't focus on immigration policies because we need a border wall. Well, no, we need a little bit of both. We need better border security, and we need better and easier path to citizenship for the people who do want to come here. Mm-hmm. There's compromise. And that's the thing. Malcolm Gladwell does a fantastic job. He's got a TED Talk that's titled Spaghetti Sauce, and he goes through all of these issues, and spaghetti sauce is one of them. It was talking about Pepsi and like how sweet Pepsi should be, And at the end of it, he comes up, he goes, the moral of all these stories is there's no perfect answer. There's only perfect answers.
That's a neat way to look at it. The only issue I take is with the word compromise. My friend Neil Dukoff, and I'm giving you a bunch of people that make great guests for you, but hey, Neil wrote a book called No Compromise Leadership. Mm-hmm. And, the idea, because the word compromise has a certain connotation that we're sacrificing something, right? It's not that at all. It's collectively, like I said, we're coming up with a better way. There's good parts of what I have, good parts of what you have. And then, that kind of circles back to that idea. And instead of fault, why don't we say responsibility? But, Goodwin's Law, right? That all conversations end up somehow evoking Hitler and the Nazis.
Right.
Well, we have Belichick's Law, because somehow I always bring it to the New England Patriots, and that's one of the remarkable things. People have, and a lot of people in leadership have studied these guys, right? How does this organization maintain such an incredible record of success? And a lot of it is you watch press conferences with almost any team in the league, and week after week you hear somebody blaming another unit or blaming somebody else, right? If you ever heard a New England Patriot, and if you have, he's probably gone the next week, right? Blame somebody else. Every single person on that team, when they're doing their pressers, oh, geez, you know what? I could have thrown a few, and Brady's the best one of all.
Yeah.
I should have thrown a little bit better. I didn't make good decisions. And Edelman says, well, I dropped two critical things, in the defense as well. It's not really the offense's fault. They're all taking blame. So, what an amazing power there is if we have a team where everybody's saying, hey, it's my fault, but not in a bad way, right? Yeah. I'm acknowledging this. It's my responsibility. And then quickly shift gears. You got to double clutch that. Oh, nobody knows what that is anymore. Now you know how old I am. I've got to double clutch that thing and say, let's get it rolling in the right direction again, right? And so
yeah. Well, no, and again, and that's so you hit another one that is a sweet spot of mine is the I talk about the power of ownership, right? And it's scary. But when you take ownership of the situation, you take all the power on yourself. You don't let somebody else be able to judge you and make the corrections for you.
Right.
You get to figure it out. And like you said right there, I guarantee you, as soon as Edelman, as soon as Brady, as soon as even Belichick, hey, I screwed up. The next thing is, this is what I'm going to do to fix it. And then they go fix it.
Great leadership book, The Education of a Coach, which analyzes Belichick's development. And very interesting, because I know people, wherever I travel, people hate that he says this, but the famous thing, we're on to Cincinnati, right?
Right.
We're on to, that's it. The minute that game is over, it's over, Yep. Now they're going to go into analysis mode. I know you military guys call it what? After action assessment, right?
Yep.
That's critical. That's a critical part of it. But it's not lamenting. It's not, not wallowing in misery. It's just looking at it clinically. It's over. It's done. Can't do anything about that. Let's look at what we can change, right?
Well, yeah, and it's the it's the kind of the exact opposite. And I'm using your Patriots here again, but look at what happened to the Seahawks after the he should have handed it off to Marshawn play. Right?
Oh yeah.
They relived that the entire offseason.
There's the danger. And you know what the thing is, too, and the brilliance of a leader like Belichick, and I could cite other examples of this, too. The thing is, when you lament that mistake or you lament that bad decision, you're going forward assuming that the next crisis you face or the next challenge you face is going to be the same. And it's not, you see. And too many times, whether it's a team or a business, right, They work so hard at obsessing over that particular situation that they forget that situation. And again, I'm going to bring it back to my roots in martial arts. I used to tell my students, study technique, study tradition, but don't be hung by it, right? Don't be hung by the technique. The technique is a means, not an ends. It's to help us prepare, and then we've got to try to introduce a lot of variables so that we can apply those things in different situations. And it's exactly the same with leadership. The Seahawks, you're right, and that's a great example. And it's funny because statistically, somebody did a mathematical study of that, and you know what? Found out that the pass was probably the higher percentage play in that situation. Isn't that incredible?
Well, it is.
It didn't work, but
well,
If Marshawn had run it up the middle and the Pats had been sitting there waiting for him, they would have been crapping all over him for that, right?
Well, yeah, it's what is it? The fine line between genius and insanity, right? And I don't want to turn it into a full blown sports show, but the thing is,
that's okay with me.
if you watch that play, if Malcolm Butler wasn't at the exact spot at the exact right time, that play pays off and they score a touchdown.
Well, there it is in a nutshell, too. And I know that's been beaten to death, but, you hear the interviews with him. How did he know to be there? They prepared for that situation, right? They didn't know that was going to happen, but it was a likely probability in that particular look, right? And he was there, and that's the thing. So now we're back to confidence again, right? That preparation, knowing that, I don't know if I'm going to win the fight, but I better damn well know I deserve to be in the ring. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that's what anybody, military, I'm sure at NASA, anything like that, has been part of any type of planning. What everyone that really understands is the planning process isn't about what will happen, it's about what could happen.
Amen.
There's the famous story of Eisenhower. As soon as the D-Day invasion kicks off, he rips the plans up and throws them in the trash. Because as soon as it kicks off, they're no good. They're good to tell them what happens when things go wrong and how to fix it. But once you start action, you don't know what's going to happen.
Angelo Dundee used to tell Muhammad Ali all the time. He said, "You plan for the fight, but you can't fight with a plan."
Right.
That's a great way to say it.
It is. And in boxing, I love that, but I like the way Mike Tyson said it better. He says, I can't do the Mike Tyson voice, but he says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Everybody got a plan until they get punched in the face.
That's about the only impression I can do.
Hey, there you go. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. That is recorded for all of eternity now, just so you know.
Well, I met his trainer, Kevin Rooney, one time, and the funny thing is, Kevin Rooney talks exactly the same, and I couldn't is when they were really having their outs, is
Kevin, I don't want to fight no more. No, come on, Mike, get in the ring. Come on, we got to do this.
I couldn't imagine that going back and forth, but
oh man. Well, look,
we're way off the rails now. Aren't we?
We are. Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, we've stayed on it there. I mean, there's a lot there, so this is good. I think people if nothing else, they'll get a chuckle out of your Mike Tyson impersonations there. So,
well, listen, you got to have some fun when you're exploring leadership too, because it can get to be a very ominous study and practice if you don't bring some humor to it.
Yeah. Well, so there you go again. Now that's another thing. So. So I was watching a very interesting documentary, if you will, on Atari. And they were talking about this same thing. They were talking about how Atari was, their DNA was fun. And they were kind of like the original Netflix as far as work practices go. He said, I didn't care when people came to work. I didn't care when they left. I didn't care about any of that stuff. What I cared about was, did you get the work that you needed to get done? Was it done to a high quality? That's all I cared about. If I gave you, your work task was this and you got it done in 30 minutes and then you went home and it was a good quality, well, good. You just did your work for the day. Go home, have fun. But that was the way they worked, right? And then they got acquired by, who was it that acquired them? It was one of the big tech companies at the time. But they changed it, like overnight. It was corporate, it was stuffy. Yeah. And that was the whole reason the company collapsed, right?
Yeah.
And, so that type of work attitude, I guess where I'm going with this is, it's great, but if you could have found, again, we're talking about the middle ground here a little bit, what would the scene have looked like if this company, they acquired it for, 20 or 30 million, which was huge at the time, and then they essentially killed it by stuffing a different culture into it.
Yeah, there it is, that conundrum of the imposition of culture, and we face that a lot. In fact, one of our, I guess, most often requested focuses is on overcoming resistance to change, and the reason that ties in with this is because, my attitude about it is, well, why do you want to overcome the resistance? Why not pay attention to it? That resistance, and if somebody is brave enough to offer some resistance, That's a gift, Pay attention to it. Why are people resistant to whatever you're trying to offer? And a lot of times it's because something's being imposed. And one of the toughest ones, you're exactly right, it happens a lot with mergers and acquisitions, is that imposition of a different culture and a different set and brand of leadership. That's difficult. And one of the things, and I'm sure you've encountered this too, I can say honestly that I can be a very judgmental person at times. And I've had to train myself to be very non-judgmental when I go to an organization. They may be doing everything exactly the opposite of the way I think it should be done, but they might be operating very successfully and people may be very happy and productive. Mm-hmm. And right, so it's a matter of looking at that. It's looking at a culture, say, why, not, instead of how can I fix it or change it, sometimes you look at it and say, well, why is this working? Where it isn't working, why isn't it working in this area? And those are the things to focus. But that idea of overcoming the resistance to change. No, usually when there's resistance, there's a damn good reason for it.
Right.
Right. And so you're either going to decide you're going to try to do a sales job, right? And that's the right. The word is buy-in, right? How do we get people to buy into this? I said, you better stop trying to get them buy in and start asking.
Right.
Because buying in means you're trying to sell them something, and that means none of us like to be sold, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing a sell job, it means people don't want it for whatever reason. Now figure it out, right?
Yep.
And then you won't have to overcome the resistance. In fact, when you open it up, and don't mean that just as clever, when you ask, when you involve people in a process of change, a process of transition, as many players as you can, early and often, they'll come up with the problems and the challenges before you will, and probably more than you will. Right, you're back to your NASA example, yep. And then you're going to be able to address these things before they become critical problems. They won't even be problems; there'll be a discussion and a solution, right, that nobody will even remember.
Man, and that got me. So one of the things that I really enjoy is helping people get ready for interviews. Mm-hmm. And the one piece of advice I give folks that seems to shock, especially the first time we went through the process, is remember one thing. You're not the only one being interviewed here. You're interviewing them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't seem like a fit now, don't take the job.
Yeah, it's not going to get any better, is it?
Right. So
very seldom, I should say. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you get that feeling that this guy is going to be a jerk to work for, that this lady is going to be overbearing, chances are pretty good. Because during an interview, everybody wants to put their best foot forward, right?
And isn't it funny? Right? Isn't it funny? If you asked 100 people, if we just polled 100 people right now and said, what are the chances of you encountering anybody randomly and expect them to change over the next year? And it almost universally said, no, they're not going to change. And yet at the same time, in our most intimate and valuable relationships at work, life partners, all these things, we expect people to change.
Right.
Change is hard work. Not everybody's going to do it. So I agree with you. You should be... Right, you should be as much as possible if you're finding the right fit, and asking the questions is the key to it, isn't it?
Oh,
that's a danger. We have to make sure that and again, we have to train ourselves to do that. That was a downfall in martial arts. I remember going to this sales seminar of all things, and it was very interesting because the guy said, you guys scare people away all the time. If someone calls you or walks in, he said, first of all, if someone walks into your dojo, they want what you have. And this guy mm-hmm. came from the car sales world. He said, we wish we had that advantage, right?
Right.
So at any rate, he said, you're scaring them away. You're telling them how tough it is. You're telling them how tough you are. You're telling them this and that. And you're telling them what you're going to do, blah, blah, blah. He said, how about asking them? Ask why they're here. Ask what they're looking for. So we actually did it where, oh, God, I'm dating myself again. Remember those things we used to have on the desk that actually had paper, and then there were these things that you used to write with that left a material on the paper? So,
right.
Anyway, we called it a Sharpie, right? And we said,
yeah.
So we would write ask in big letters on our planners every month to remind us, when that person's sitting across from us, instead of just telling them things, let's start asking some questions. And then we can see if we're a fit, if we can satisfy their needs. And most of the time we could. And that was pretty interesting.
No, I like that. I guess, I'm with my background, I'm a little hesitant to buy all in on it because I think there's some value to the opposite effect, right? And again, this is my background as a Marine. There's been some studies on Marine Corps advertising and why it's so effective. And, our message basically is we're the biggest, we're the baddest, we're the few, we're the proud. You can't be one of us but just in case you think you can, here's how to get in hold of us.
Yeah. See, there's an interesting thing, and I'm gonna prove the power of this. I'm gonna use you as an experiment right now. Why do you think that works so effectively? See, I'm asking you a question, right?
Yep.
Why do you think that it works so effectively for the Marine Corps and organizations like that?
Well, because you got to have that mindset to fit in.
Go a little deeper. I think there's something deeper there. Why else might it? Why is it so important that you fit in right away?
Well, so personally for me, why it rang to me was it was the challenge. You know, my mindset is the worst thing you can do is tell me I can't do something, so I'm going to go do it.
Why don't you want just everybody showing up?
Oh, well, that's for that. I mean, again, it's the selectivism. You want to be part of something elite.
Well, there you go. And your life depends on that, right?
Right.
So you're qualifying it, and so there's a purpose behind that. See what I'm saying? But the point is, see, and I was messing with you a little bit, but I was seeking understanding. You know,
yeah.
My questions were coming from your responses. You see, and that's
right.
the skill that we try to share with leaders. I'm listening very carefully to what you're saying, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, so what's underneath this? What's underneath that? And I'm not asking rhetorical questions usually. Sometimes it's good. You know, lawyers say don't ask a question unless you know the answer. There's a place for that. But also there's a place to be very open-minded. Like I said, as you started to go, what I kept hearing from you is that, you know what, you don't want everybody in the Marines. You only want the people that are embracing that challenge. Right now, you flip that over to our martial arts center. We dedicated ourselves to being a personal development center. We wanted everybody. We didn't want to scare somebody away.
Right.
You see,
yeah.
So we wanted to be more inclusive. So there's the thing, right? But I wouldn't have understood what you were talking about unless I asked those questions. And there's the point. Leaders need to. And here's the thing too. There's this cliche that I absolutely hate. That leaders need to know all the answers.
Right.
Hell, they do. No, they don't. In fact, the guy who knows all the answers usually is an arrogant jerk, right? Usually is the blowhard that really doesn't know anything. The leader doesn't need to know the answers usually. Very seldom needs to know the answers. The leader needs to know how to formulate the right questions in that moment.
Yes.
You see, and that's a process. So, yeah.
Well, and again, that's one of the other odd things that they taught us in boot camp that I didn't get right off the bat is you know, we always had these inspections, and part of the inspection was knowledge. They'd come ask you all these questions. And the one thing they told us, if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know the answer, but I will look it up. Mm-hmm. If you give me an answer, then you'd better be right. But if you don't know the answer...
Yeah.
So, you know, that was where I first... And then later on, I was reading about Einstein, and I saw his quote. I guess the way the story goes is somebody asked him to recite pi, and he gave the standard 3.14.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how far can you go? He goes, well, that's as far as I need to go. It's like, you can't go any more places? He goes, well, hold on a second. He goes, he gets a book.
Yeah.
And they ask him, it's like, you're one of the greatest mathematicians on the planet, and you can't remember pi past 2 places? He's like, why waste my brain power memorizing it when I can look it up?
Exactly. But isn't that fascinating? Now we're touching on educational leadership. One of the big problems that's happened now, for the first time since these studies have been done, right? Young people, as a rule, their ability to go look for answers is diminished radically over the last few years, right? It's too instantaneous. Either they can find it too quickly on Google and they don't go past that first level, right? I mean, I think Google is amazing, but Google should be the first step. Okay, now I saw this quote. I see this book. Now I want to go read that book. Now I want to learn about the person that wrote that book, you see? And they don't go that deep. Or they just turn and ask their teachers, and the teachers give them the answer.
Or even worse, and I'm going to activate my phone here, so I'm making sure it's turned off, but they always just say, hey, Siri, what's...
Right. Fortunately, Siri doesn't understand my main accent, so Siri and I have a very difficult relationship. It's probably a good thing. Yeah.
I just saw that just the other day. Like somebody was... I was at the airport, actually, and they were watching on their phone, or no, on the TV it was daggone Jeopardy, right?
Right.
And like as the questions were popping up, this joker was like, hey, Siri, what's such and such?
Oh, no, really?
And I'm sitting here like, really? If you just waited 5 seconds, or take a stab at it.
Yeah, that defeats the whole purpose. You're supposed to think, you know.
Like, that's
terrible.
Well, man, we're coming up. We're approaching an hour here, and I want to.
Holy cow!
Yeah, I know, right? I warned everybody at the beginning this was going to be a nice, easy conversation because Jim and I have talked quite a bit. We talked about the bird to command stuff. We've talked about your Sensei leader movement and the trips coming up to Africa. We talked about a lot. We talked about your love for Patriots football. And is there anything that you would like to share with my listeners now that we haven't touched on yet?
Whenever anyone presses me for like a summation or something like that, and usually most of my presentations I end this way too, when I'm pressed to summarize leadership in one idea, and you just use the word, leadership is sharing. A leader shares. The rest of the discussion really is about exactly what is it that we're going to share and how are we going to do it. And that's what the Sensei Leader Movement's all about. We're just trying to facilitate, help people through that process and do that. So, there it is. It's lovely to talk with you. We got to get you back on Walking the Walk as well. And yeah. I love what you're doing. I love this podcast. I've listened to a couple episodes now, and we're sharing that out. And really appreciate the good work you're doing. We need more people like you out here, helping develop the next generation of leaderships, no matter what your age, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, I appreciate it, brother. And listeners, I'll have the information to get a hold of Jim, social media accounts, all that good stuff in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this, please make sure that you subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your platform of choice. We're on Google, we're on iTunes, and in the Podbean app itself. If you have any questions for Jim, if you have any ideas for future guests, feel free to reach out to me at burden.command. It's just burden.command@gmail.com, and I'll get those questions out to Jim. And again, Jim, thanks for listening. Really appreciate it, and definitely going to have you back on in the future.
Thank you, Lynn. It was an absolute honor, really.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And listeners, go ahead, do what I was telling you before. Hit me with the email addresses, and above all else, make sure you keep those shields up. And we'll talk to you the next time.